Greetings, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our first Big Ideas lesson of the year. Big Ideas lesson 1.1, page 4 and 5 on integers and absolute value. And of course, before watching this video, you have read and taken notes on your insert, right? On your insert, you've taken notes after reading page 4 and 5 in your Big Ideas math book. Today, integers and absolute value, we are going to find the absolute value of an integer. And yes, we will discuss, and you should have read about integers. So you should know. Our essential question is, how can you use integers to represent real life situations of numbers? I'm excited. I hope you are too. Let's go find out. So ladies and gentlemen, you took some notes on integers and absolute value from the key idea at the top of page 4. And you should have learned a few things. One, you should have learned about integers. You should have learned that integers, well, integers are what? Integers are whole numbers and their opposite. Now, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that they're whole numbers and their opposites, but it shows them. First of all, whole numbers are what? Are counting numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those were the first ones you learned when you were a baby. Your parents taught you to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the counting numbers. Then you make them whole numbers by adding a 0 to that set of numbers. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you make that set integers by adding the opposites of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which would be negative. So if we start with -4 and -3 and -2 and -1, and then you have 0, and then we start with our counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., etc. It goes on and on and on in each direction. Those are our integers, okay? So today we're going to, now that we know what integers are, we're going to find the absolute value of those integers, and you could have read about it and written down the notes in your own words in some way. Hopefully you didn't just copy this whole entire thing. That would be a total waste of time. So you should have read it, you should have summarized it, and then you should have written it down in your notes using your own words. Hey, that the absolute value there, it's just its distance. It's just the distance between that number and 0. On a number line, okay? And then, of course, you have the fact that absolute value is written using 2 bars. That is important, knowing that it is written using 2 bars on the side of a number. So in the example that they showed you to explain absolute value, the distance between that number and 0, they first have the absolute value of -4, and they started at -4 right here with the red dot, and then you can count 1, 2, 3, 4 units to get to 0. So the absolute value of -4 is 4. And of course, if you went to 4, the absolute value of 4, well, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 units away from 0, the absolute value of 4 is 4. You're probably going to recognize the absolute value of any negative number is going to be that number positively. So it's going to be that number positive. So let's go right along and do some examples. Ladies and gentlemen, finding the absolute value of a number. I gave you a number line on the first few just so that you could have some fun and count it out. So the absolute value of 5, so I go to my number line and I find the number 5, and it's right here. And now I'm just going to count, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 units. 5 units to get over to 0, so the absolute value of 5 is equal to 5. Pretty easy stuff. How about the absolute value of -3? Well, I put my dot at -3, and now I just count 1, 2, 3. It is 3 units away, 3 units from -3 to 0. So the absolute value of -3 is 3. All right? Moving right along, we can just do all these now real quick. We don't need a number line for all these. We just recognize that the absolute value of a number is that number, and that number being positive. Whether it's the absolute value of a negative number or the absolute value of a positive number, the answer is that number positive, right? So the absolute value of -28 is going to be 28, okay? It's going to be 28. How about the absolute value of 72? Well, that's going to be 72. Right? And the absolute value of negative, almost said that wrong. In fact, I did say that wrong. It's the negative absolute value of 64. All right? Now, this is important. You learned about order of operations. We're going to be talking a lot about order of operations this year, and we're changing it. You probably learned it as PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, because P stood for parentheses. Well, we no longer talk about P anymore, because there are way more things than parentheses that would say, hey, you have to do this first. So we have to change it to G. G meaning grouping symbols. Grouping symbols tell us that everything inside those grouping symbols have to be done first. And absolute value bars act just like parentheses. They are a grouping symbol, which means everything in the absolute value bars has to be done first before everything on the outside. So if we just pretend that the negative is not there, then we say the absolute value of 64 is 64. However, there is a negative on the outside that we have to leave. So the negative absolute value of 64 is negative 64. And then we go on to another one that looks a little strange. When we have the negative absolute value of a negative 87, inside our absolute value bars, we have negative 87. And the absolute value of negative 87 is 87. Except we still have that negative on the outside that has to stay. So the negative absolute value of negative 87 is negative 87. I hope that makes sense. If not, you're making a highlight, you're starring it, you're putting a question mark there, and you're coming to class tomorrow and you're having questions for Mr. Ross when we go over our notes. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our first video. It's pretty straightforward. And you seek understanding, so now we do our quick write. Remember, your quick write is done in your notes on the left-hand page. I've shown you how to do that. And you have quick write number 1, and you have a whole bunch of parts in this one. Part A, in your own words, write a complete sentence to explain the absolute value of a number. So I want good penmanship. I want a complete sentence with punctuation, capitalization, and all the things that come into writing an appropriate sentence in junior high. Part B, you need to describe a real-life situation where one might use the absolute value of a number. Where might you use that in real life? All right? And then C, D, and E, I have 3 different absolute values that you need to find. And if you would please copy those down, just pause the video, copy them down, and then you may finish those. I always recommend after finishing the first video and the quick write, get a quick break. Get a snack, get a drink, take a quick walk around, get the blood flowing again, and then come back and watch the next video. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you back shortly for video number 2.